Awesome. I just want to officially announce the start of the session. We just started the recording. It is Wednesday, May 21st, 2014, and this is DCMOOC. Tonight, this is a repeat of last night's session for those of us who couldn't make the first live session. And we have a number of people. We had about over 100 last night. That time seems to be pretty good for a lot of people. But this, I know, works for many others who are at school and just joining us. So I really want to thank everyone who's been able to, I think we had about 120 people, I believe, last night. But again, this is a repeat. Did others lose the audio? Let me see. I'll turn the video off. Okay. Can you hear me now? It seems to be catching up. Test, test, test. All right. If that happens again, let me know. I know we've been having some issues at the university today. At worst case scenario, I'll tether from my phone and we'll find internet one way or the other. Okay, so you can hear me again. Great. I hope it sticks with it this way and it doesn't cut out. I guess both the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Regina have been experiencing a few connectivity issues today, so that may be the piece. Where we started, this session really is the beginning of the content in, that's right, I turned off the video. I don't think the video is as important as the audio in this particular case, so turn it off and that hopefully will take care of any bandwidth issues. If you do have any trouble throughout the session hearing audio, let me know. Yeah, I turned off the video. All right. A little bit of a slow start. Audio seems to be a little slow. There's a lot of slower connections today. Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay. Well, hopefully this is okay. I see a number of slow connections for whatever reason. Okay, so some people are hearing me okay. So again, this is an introduction to digital citizenship. This is sort of our first stab at the real content in this MOOC. I'm going to advance a slide just to let you know what else is happening this week. We have some exciting sessions coming up. So this is one of what we call the core sessions, and the core sessions kind of take us to some of the key questions in the course. But after this, at 7 o'clock tonight, that's about 4 hours and 10 minutes from now. I believe, no, 3 hours and 10 minutes from now. If you're still around, we have a session from Sue Waters, who's from Australia, who is talking about an introduction to blogging. So if you are interested in blogging, that's something that you can certainly participate in. Yeah, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want, the amazing Kathy Cassidy is doing a session at the same start time as this one, only a day apart, and she's talking about digital citizenship in the early years. And we also have a Twitter chat tomorrow as well. That'll be 9 p.m. Eastern Time or 7 p.m. Saskatchewan time. So we'd love you to be part of it as well. So yeah, Sue is amazing. Kathy Cassidy is amazing. And our Twitter chats have been a lot of fun. So if you want to participate in other ways, there's lots of other ways to participate and lots of great items in this calendar. So there's a link to the calendar, especially if you're someone who is not familiar with the way this MOOC works. So off to the contents. I do want to give you a Google Doc, and what I'll do is I'll paste it in here. And the different links that I talk about tonight, the links in the Google Doc actually appear in order that I talk about them in the session here. So there'll be the odd time that I ask you to click on a link or to take notice of something during the session. So that's kind of useful. After this session, I'm going to also post these slides to either SlideShare or to Dropbox, and get you, get you a copy of them, so you have, so you can take a look at them, and then you don't have to worry so much about note taking in that sense, and you can just actually enjoy the content and see the references and that right in the slides. All right, so I'm going to move to the slides here, and I'm going to turn over to the next one. That's the Google Doc. And we're going to start the conversation with really trying to understand what digital citizenship is and where it came from. And I think that's, yeah, feel free to chatter away as well. I mean, use the chat room. Oh, by the way, a great tip, by the way, if you are using a computer rather than an iPad, I'm not sure if you can do the same thing on an iPad, but what you can do is actually take that chat window, because the chat tends to go pretty fast in these sessions, and you can actually drag and drop it to another part of the screen and expand it and make it bigger. So that's a really helpful tip if you want to follow the chat, because that's really where the action's happening. A lot of great links are being shared, lots of great conversation in that particular chat window. So it's useful to kind of spend some time in there. Don't worry about trying to take everything in. Everything's sort of optional. And of course, if you also want to tweet, you can use the DCMOOC hashtag, and you can find a lot of other people engaged in this MOOC out on Twitter as well. So it's really great to do that, because it allows you to capture the discussion. I think that's the richest part of this course. So digital citizenship, when you look at it, well, thanks for coming, Sue. When you look at it, a lot of this stuff came from, and many of you who have been teachers for the last few years have known that we've talked a lot about cyber safety. And cyber safety was kind of the early precursor to what we now call digital citizenship. I call it digital citizenship 1.0. And for a long time, I think education, and in particular technology, seemed to be sort of an option in our classes, in education in general, and that we didn't really have to 100% use it. I mean, some people used it in libraries or computer labs, but it wasn't integral and ubiquitous in the classroom as it is today. And so often educators were a little bit reluctant to use it, and certainly there are those today still reluctant to use it, but we often kind of scared people. So this is one of my favorite artifacts of the time, certainly the late 90s, where we spent a lot of time really scaring kids a little bit in terms of their understanding, or our understanding, of the internet as being a really, really dangerous place. And I always thought this was kind of an interesting one. There was also some public service announcements. Oh, got someone's audio on. I'm going to see if I can turn that off. Someone's got their mic on. Okay, great. So now we turned that off. So yeah, if you have your mic on, we'll be able to hear everything you say there. So just leave the talk button alone if you can for now. Of course, if you want to say something, feel free to raise your hand. There's a little hand icon, and that would be a great time anytime you can actually ask questions that way. And you can also ask questions in the chat room, because I have a couple of moderators, Joanna and Katya, who are in there looking for questions and providing feedback and so on. Can everyone still hear me okay? Great, okay. Perfect. So the first video I wanted you to take a look at, and this is kind of an artifact of those times when we were a little bit more freaked out by the internet. And so what I would like you to do is I'm going to post this YouTube video to the chat. If you can click on this, it's about 1 minute long, and come back right after you're done, and just let me know in the chat when you're done. So go right ahead and watch that video if you'd like. It's in the chat. Sorry about that. Can you hear me again? Oh, sorry about that. I think we lost the internet, but I'm on my phone now, and it seems to be working okay. Yeah, so I wanted to know what your thoughts are on this particular on this particular video. I think some of you have said it already. So what do you think about the message in this particular video? It's been a bit of a controversial one. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Realistic, is it? Very true, it happens daily. What about the way that it was made? So it points out negative, not the positive. Yeah, Aaron says that a bit extreme, but it definitely happens. Students don't believe. Not getting through, really good, make you think. Okay. So I think, I mean, it's mixed messages. I mean, one of the comments last night was someone mentioned it was actually quite gendered, which I think it is. A couple of you mentioned that this sort of thing does happen, but maybe this is a bit too sensationalized, a little bit scary. Some people call it creepy. So there's a lot of interesting things here. The positivity piece I think is important. So I do think there's certainly examples of sexual predation on the internet. This particular article, and if you look at your Google Doc, there's an article. It's actually the second one in the Google Doc if you missed the Google Doc. That's actually a pretty balanced article on this. And basically it says predation is a concern. It existed before the internet, but it is overblown by the media. And they mentioned that the biggest risk is probably bullying and harassment, most frequent threats faced by minors. So it's less about so much adults or adult influence in these particular spaces, that we really have to watch out for bullying and harassment, especially in the peer sense. So I think this is really important to think about. I personally really like the sentence, think before your post, that we should be intentional about what we post online, but at the same time, what's a bit I guess that I don't like as much is probably the gender nature of that particular piece and the sensationalism within that. But I think it's one to think about. I think we have to be very careful with this, and it's great to see you having a really lively debate on this particular media, and we need to do that more often. So great to see you there. And it also kind of reflects on the approach that many educators and schools have had on using digital media in schools. That we think in many cases that we can control kids. That if we give them a sense of fear or provide them with fear, that's usually good enough, and that the internet and technology is predictable, that we can predict where it's going, how kids use them, and so on. And I think these have been really false assumptions in terms of how it's actually played out. Even if you look at things like drug commercials or anti-drug commercials, those sorts of things haven't played very well out when it comes down to PSAs. And wherever you actually bring in a more realistic approach, this is where you actually see more effectiveness in terms of controlling or changing behaviors amongst teens or other people as well. And I think that's a good question there. Like Sherry Lane says, thoughts on what age grade to use that video? I'm not 100% sure, but there might be experts in this chat room that might provide some good examples of, where would you use that? Why would you use it? And how do you make sure that it's a balanced approach to some of that sort of stuff? Now, we live certainly in a world that's much more ubiquitous in terms of technology. We have kids, we see images of this pretty much everywhere. And if I think about my own kids, they can sometimes get like this, where they seem very disconnected from others. This is kind of an interesting one too, very disconnected people from this particular perspective. I think we can do a lot of analysis on these scenes from everyday life. Obviously this isn't a good trend at all. Sort of the rituals that we have around food, I think are really kind of an interesting thing to talk to kids about. Even Love in the Digital Age is probably my favorite of the series here, thinking about how we can be in one moment but really in another at the same time sometimes. So it's really kind of interesting to see and how we live life through screens, and whether there is really life on the other side of screens. There was a video that was really kind of, it was really trending on Facebook, and a lot of people sent it around, and with the kind of the comments like, this is so exactly what we need to do. It was called Look Up. How many people saw this video? Do you remember? If you've been on Facebook in the last couple of weeks, you've probably seen it, right? And it's really something, for me, I thought it was a really good idea. If you haven't seen it, Carol, I think I missed who said that. There is a link to it right in that Google Doc, and I'll put that Google Doc in there. You don't have to watch it right now, but it's going to be something that you look at. Basically, the video was about, we should look up and live life and not live it through the screens. But just yesterday, I actually saw a response to this, which was really well done, and I would watch them both. And it was really, the whole opposite, that life is actually being lived in those particular screens, and that, it's much deeper and it's much more about relationships than we think. So I think it's two really great and differing perspectives on digital life, and I think they're both equally valid, and I think we have to be very cautious to discount technology as something that's not real. Yesterday I talked about the notion of digital dualism by a guy by the name of Nathan Jurgensen, and he talks about the idea that that there's no such thing as really online versus offline for kids anymore, that it's a false dualism that we provide as adults, that it's either face-to-face or it's either in real life or online, but in reality those are really part of the same thing, that for many kids online is actually just as real as face-to-face, I guess, in many cases. So it's something that we have to think about. And as Aaron's saying, it's true in counseling, have to work with kids where they are, and I think that's really important too. So in this whole notion, this topic, and that's known in as digital citizenship, I like this particular quote from Mike Ribble, who says, "It's a concept which helps teachers and technology leaders understand what students should know to use technology appropriately." But I like the last part especially, but digital citizenship is far more than just a teaching tool. It is a way to prepare students for a society full of technology. And I think that's where it really differs from cyber safety, where we sort of really understand that this is not going away, that if anything, technology is going to be more ubiquitous, and there's going to be more access to technology in the future than there's going to be less. And I think we have to be very careful about that and really take this on as an important issue in terms of raising our kids digital, and I think that's really an important piece here. So Mike Ribble, and this is also linked on the Google Doc, I believe, has these 9 themes of digital citizenship. And when the government of Saskatchewan unveils its digital citizenship policy guide, I forget what the actual name of it is, which you'll see by the end of the course, there's these 9 themes which are addressed quite well. What I'm going to do in this presentation is kind of lump these themes together, or at least the ones that I think are the most important for now, and talk specifically about these particular themes: the idea of content, remix, identity, netiquette, and activism. And hopefully this will sort of resonate with you too. So no problem, Eric. Never too late. You can always watch the recording. So thanks everyone for coming. All right. So if you haven't already, this is kind of an important guide here. So there's actually a DCMOOC. If you go to DCMOOC.ca, and so at the end of each one of these sections, there's actually going to be a way of participating. So if you go to DCMOOC.ca, that's our main site. If you click on, where does it say? Okay, under Content Overview, there is actually weekly prompts, and then you can find where it says Week 2 prompts. So what I think is really important in this course, it's not just about the content in this course, it's how you are actually navigating several spaces. So to get the most out of this MOOC, I think it's important to think about, how do I not only attend these sessions, but perhaps how do I develop an identity on Twitter, or how do I use Google Plus communities, for instance, to communicate there. Maybe I want to get a blog, and that's why you might want to attend Sue Waters' session tonight if you're wondering about blogs and that sort of thing. So we've given you some ideas of where you can actually answer some of these questions. Of course, you can do some of it tonight, but you can also, like in the chat forum, but you can also do it in a number of different ways. So there's just some ways of actually answering some of the questions, or at least attempting to have a conversation around some of these pieces. It is certainly overwhelming, but the internet is overwhelming. So what I would suggest to you is, don't think of it as something that you have to always read every single post. If you go in, find something that resonates, and maybe contribute a little bit, you're doing well. You don't have to read everything. And I think that's what's really, really important, is you end up starting to cluster around certain topics and certain people. And that's how, I think that's how you participate in here. Just really tiny, as Ted says, it's about taking sips. It's really just, and Carola says the same thing. Take a dip, young grasshopper, and take a sip. That's all you really have to do. Don't worry about taking in everything. It's impossible, for sure. So really good advice from people who are there, who have done this before. So thanks for being experts in the room there. All right. So the first big content of the topic here I want to talk about is content. In particular, I want to talk about, what does it mean to have inappropriate content? And what I've done in the past is I've collected a number of magazine covers that have been, at time, very controversial. So this is from the 1960s, 1966, when this was touted to be one of the most, inappropriate magazine covers, and controversial, I guess, at one time. In the 70s, it was this particular magazine cover that caused some waves or rocked some boats, I guess, in that sense, where it was less about this magazine being Playboy, but it was the first African-American model on the Playboy, which caused ripples, which was kind of an interesting controversy at the time. 20 years later, Vanity Fair put out Demi Moore in a fully, I can't remember, I think she was 8 months pregnant at the time, on a magazine cover, and I thought that was really kind of an interesting piece. And it was very controversial at the time in terms of not so much what color skin or how much skins or whose skin. It was really kind of an interesting time to think about, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Ellen coming out in 1996 was a big deal. Obviously, things have changed certainly around her and how popular she's become. But even if you look at the recent person in the NFL who's come out, really a different time, really kind of a different situation, but a similar situation that we're still not comfortable with many of these topics. This in 2006 was an interesting piece. It was ripped down from grocery store magazine shelves, and a lot of angry mothers didn't think that this particular photograph was appropriate, and I thought that was really an interesting controversy at the same time. Is it moving here? Oh, can you still hear me okay? Oh, perfect. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you could hear me. There has been, back in a couple of years ago, 2010, I guess 4 years ago already, there was one study that said that there's about 37% of the total content of the internet is pornography. And that was kind of an interesting study at the time. Now, I'm not sure how true it was, but we actually think that there's less pornography now in the last few years than there was back then. And later academic studies suggested that only about 4% is pornography. So it's not so much, how much there is, but I guess what sort of things are happening on the internet. So of course we've spent a lot of time trying to block this stuff from kids, and I think it's really kind of an interesting time for a lot of this, because really it's tough to block anything. Australia actually tried to put a nationwide filter across many of their ISPs. It was interesting to see this happen back in 2007. They put in $84 million to put this porn filter across many ISPs, and it's happening in the UK right now, actually, but something very similar. A team cracked this thing in 30 minutes, and it was later abandoned. It's impossible to basically block people from content they want to see. If you think about this, for instance, from a content restriction standpoint, I assume many of you have come to like Netflix or Pandora or Spotify in your respective nations and have tried to get around things, and it may say something like, this is not available in your country. And I've actually created a little blog post that explains how to get around these international content restrictions, and that's in the Google Doc as well. So, no matter what you want, you can basically get to see just about anything you want. And that comes from the school level and so on. I love this quote from David Weiss, I think this is it here, that really, rather than creating these filters in schools and other places, he simply says, I'm in favor of internet filters, I just want to move them from the router to my students' heads. And I really think this is a really important theme and idea, that ultimately when we think about content in the context of digital citizenship, that this is what we want to do. We want kids to build a sense of self-regulatory discrimination, I think, in that sense, to be able to decide what is worth watching, what is worth me spending my time on, what's affecting me in a positive way. And I think that's really important too. And it's not simply just content that's the deal now. We're seeing many activities that can be, that lead to inappropriate activities. So there's something called chat roulette. Who knows about chat roulette here? Who knows what it is here? Some of you do know? Nope, nope, don't? Okay. Yeah, it's been around for a while actually. And there's another one that used to be kind of popular too. It's called Omegle, which basically does the same thing. So chat roulette is basically, it can be quite disturbing. As you know, Regan, you know, as a former student, I kind of understand your age demographic, and a lot of college students are using this sort of thing, and certainly in high school as well. Chat roulette, it's a website that pairs random strangers from around the world together for webcam-based conversations. That's straight from the Wikipedia article. The issue is that it can be quite disturbing, I guess, depending on how you view it. Within a few clicks, you often end up into stuff that, you know, someone could do things that are very inappropriate. And so this is, I'm not sure if elementary students are using this or not. Someone mentioned that there. I'm not sure how prevalent it is. I'm assuming at some point someone of that age has used something similar to this. I know many high school students do use this sort of thing. The deal with it, I guess, is that many of these things that are on the fringe at one point become popular because, you know, for instance, this is a video, and if you ever have a chance, it's kind of a funny thing, but it's basically based on chat roulette. And so this was actually just out a little while ago. The video went viral. It's in your Google Doc. Or maybe it's not in the Google Doc, but if you Googled chat roulette and wrecking ball, you'd basically see this. And what was interesting about this is there's some evidence to suggest that people watch a video on, you know, on YouTube. So millions and millions of people saw this, and they were instantly exposed to something that's more on the fringe, such as chat roulette, and then people decide to, you know, go check it out, and then of course they see things that are not quite as happy and fun as this. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that these sorts of things do exist, and they become more popular at times because outside media bring people to these fringe spaces on the web. Another one that's, you know, concerning to a lot of parents is this idea of Snapchat. How many people know what Snapchat is? Okay, most of you do? Yeah, like everyone knows. Okay, so it's become really the big thing. Yeah, and a lot of people say like it's selfies. One of my students in my e-comp class basically said something like, it's like texting with your face. And I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. And you're right, Roy, kids do love it. And so, you know, a lot of people are really worried that everything that happens in chat roulette is like a horrible thing. And I think sometimes there can be bad things that happen in places like chat roulette, but there's also things that are okay as well. I think one of the greatest things about chat roulette is it does give students to play, a place to play, and brings back that idea of ephemera, where basically kids can make some bad decisions online and it doesn't end up being on Facebook in a more public place. So the idea around this obviously is for things to disappear. Now, of course, things don't actually disappear. Like there's all sorts of apps that, you know, make things last forever, and there's screenshots and all sorts of things. But I think it's kind of I think it's important to understand that kids don't have the privilege of things to disappear anymore. And I think that's, you know, in some ways it's a healthy thing. There's actually other tools like Squawk. It says a fun all-in-one messenger that lets you be you. I like that idea that, you know, to be you, to be authentic, is to make mistakes. The idea, you know, the easiest way to share disappearing moments. These are really interesting, you know, tools that now have to exist because of our digital culture, that everything that's online tends to stay online. And so I think it's an interesting conversation around these tools of how do kids use them? Do they need these spaces? And how do kids communicate otherwise if they want to, you know, fool around and goof around? And I'm not, you know, in any way condoning things like sexting in this sense. But what I am trying to, you know, get through to you is that, you know, the odd sort of funny face or, you know, message or statement, or every once in a while, are kids playing with particular social norms? And I think it's an interesting thing to really, you know, think about this and how kids are actually growing up. And I think in many cases you have to make a lot of mistakes to truly grow up. There are other things that are a bit more disturbing. This was actually a Facebook app a while ago that was called Bang with Friends. And basically the idea was you could go through your friend list and check off people you'd be willing to get with. And basically what would happen is if people also installed the app and they checked your name off, you'd basically be told, similar to Hot or Not, I guess, in that sense. Yeah, so this is, and as Regan says, Tinder is one of these same types of apps. You read my mind, Regan. So Tinder is the same sort of idea where you basically pull up an iPhone app. What happens here is basically you're fed people with Tinder profiles that are in the area, and you decide, usually by visual appearance, whether you'd be willing to, hook up with someone or I guess talk to them in that way. I'm not going to talk about Ask FM in this particular piece, but I think it's important. I could bring it up really quickly. But I'll finish with Tinder here. So basically, it allows you to communicate with people who both visually like each other. But I guess the whole idea, it's sort of like the 60s culture meets sort of digital media, and I think it's not a troubling place. It's a very different place than we grew up when we started to, consider someone who's attractive or we're interested in or that sort of thing. It's a really different conversation around dating, and I think that's important. In terms of Ask FM, I'll just mention something quickly. If you don't know what Ask FM is basically what you can do there is ask a question anonymously and you get anonymous responses. A lot of teens are using it, and they may ask a question like, am I pretty? Or, looking for those types of things that affirm themselves in terms of their own, their own doubts about their physical looks or their the kind of people they are, looking for some sort of outside or external affirmation. And what happens sometimes is, people get a lot of really negative comments, and so you see a lot of bullying in those places. You see a lot of schools banning those particular tools. There's been some interesting pieces around that. There was actually a couple of studies where they looked at students who were bullied or harassed on places like Ask FM. In some cases, they actually found that they weren't actually being bullied, that they actually were bullying themselves. They would actually go in other accounts and post negative stuff on them to either create a sense of drama or to basically self-harm. They called it digital self-harm. So I think these places are much more complex than we even think right now. Not that that's happening every single time, but this is just a really interesting thing that happened because of that. So really an interesting place to think about. Now there's some documentaries that you may be interested in, especially on this particular topic or this subtopic. Sexed Up Kids is worth watching. None of these I'd watch with kids. I'd watch them by myself or with adults. Sexed Up Kids is one worth watching. A very sad one, but quite true, I think, in many cases. The sextortion of Amanda Todd, which I think is really important. A lot of young girls in particular should be watching something like this, and this is something I actually probably watch with students. These docs are on the Google Doc. Yes, the three of them are on the Google Doc. These first two are free and available on the internet. And this one's called In Real Life. This is from the UK. It's probably the most graphic of the three. I just ended up watching it on an airplane, and it was quite interesting, but it is by far the most graphic of the three, and this is one that you actually have to buy. I'm not sure if it's available. I'm sure you could find it somewhere on the internet for free, but perhaps not legitimately free, I guess. So I'll leave it as that. We'll talk more about that. Beyond that sort of stuff, I think it's, right. I mean, there's lots of education to be had around these things, and I think that's really important. But this is a start, right? This MOOC is a start on these questions, and I think it's important that you're all here and we can get a start and we can start talking about these things together through parents, educators, admins, etc. All of us need to be, I'm by far no expert, and I'm just basically doing a lot of this because I've got 3 kids growing up, and I want to be the best parents I possibly can be to think about this stuff. Information literacy is also a really big deal. I think it's really important to understand. Oh, the Google Doc link, someone will, Katya will do that right now. For instance, how many people know who this is in this photograph? Thanks for posting that. Anyone know this? Oswald and Ruby, very good. All right. Perfect. Okay, so some of you do, some of you don't. Now, I've used this with my undergrad before, where I basically, yeah, this is JFK's assassin or alleged assassin. You know, it was kind of an interesting, you know, obviously conspiracy theories around this. Lee Harvey Oswald in the middle, and this is Jack Ruby. We know this did actually happen, or at least the photographic evidence would point to that. There's a short video that says, yeah, I did show it in eComp. What I've done in the past sometimes, I've actually, with some of my students, I asked, you know, who knows this, and what I might show is this particular photograph first, and I'll tell people that this is like Lee Harvey and the Whalers, you know, that sort of thing where you can actually kind of lie about it. And I think it's really important that we get students to start to distrust us sometimes. I think as positions of authority, it's really important to get kids to understand that there's a lot of lies out there, you know, and they happen everywhere. So, for instance, like YouTube. There's lots of great examples on YouTube, but this is one of my favorites. It's a video that's how to charge an iPod using electrolytes in an onion. And I thought that was kind of an interesting one because there's like 8 million, probably more by now, hits on that particular video. And it was basically people charging, you soak an onion overnight in Gatorade, and then you plug in your iPhone, and it looks like it's supposed to work, but it doesn't actually. And a lot of people in the comments actually lie and say that it does work, just to kind of perpetuate the lie a little bit. This is a more recent one. It's the worst twerk failure. It was basically, this video went around where this girl was doing this twerk dance, and she fell over, started on fire, and it was a viral video for a while. I think it was called the worst twerk fail ever. And then eventually Jimmy Kimmel came out and said it was a big part of his, it was just kind of a viral video that he put out there. So it's important to understand these. I think that, you know, and so yeah, Amanda's saying she fell for that one. It's easy to fall for these. I actually brought up in my class and said, how many people believe this is true? This is before Jimmy Kimmel came out, and most people actually thought it was true because there was no evidence to suggest that it wasn't true. And I was quite skeptical because I guess I'm just that skeptical guy about pretty much everything I do. And it's always great to be a skeptic, but sometimes it proves to be okay. So one of these questions, more questions that are going to be posted, you know, for this week, big questions, and these are things that we can think about for the next few weeks, or especially this week. You know, how do we ensure that learners are critical, ethical, and knowledgeable creators, consumers, and participants of our digitally mediated environments? And how do we develop skills, abilities, students' abilities to become self-regulatory in the appropriate use of digital media rather than relying on external filters and restrictions? So, you know, obviously we can answer this here. I think it's not a simple question. Like Shelby, I think that's a great example, you know, to teach and model. Ultimately, we want to teach and model, but we're not going to teach and model very well if we're not using some of these digital media. I think that's really important too. So, you know, looking at, you know, there's lots of ways that we can possibly talk about this, but, you know, besides, you know, just talking about teaching and model, so how specifically do we teach and model? And I think that's a really important question. Like, what do we actually do? What are the activities and the types of tools that we use, and how do we actually do this in our classrooms as parents, etc.? So I think really, really important, but how do we do it? And so maybe that's something that you can add to a blog post, a Twitter post. Make sure that if you want to respond to these things, you go back, and I'll just paste this in again. These are all going to be in the week 2 prompts. So these are things that we want to talk about this week. So it would be great if we heard, you know, really great, you know, feedback from you on these things so we can learn together. All right, next topic, which I think is quite interesting, is this idea of remix. And I think most of us, you know, kind of get a sense of what a remix is and what it isn't. A lot of this stuff, especially when it comes down to music piracy and using content inappropriately, comes back to Napster. I'm assuming most people remember what Napster was. Scratch is full of programming remixes, which I think is a great thing, right? Yeah, Napster, you know, really actually changed just about everything. You know, iTunes today, for instance, even Netflix can probably attribute some of their success back to early Napster. This idea that if we wanted to, we can actually absolutely get any kind of media we want from a network. And back then it was peer-to-peer networks before BitTorrent. But basically, there was that time that just opened up back in the, I think it was the 90s actually, with Napster, where we could basically, you know, download any file we wanted to. And that was really a big thing, rather than having to go to the record store, buy an entire album, You know, usually there was like 1 or 2 songs we liked and we maybe didn't like the rest of it. Really kind of an interesting time. So Napster really changed things. But in terms of piracy, even things more recently like the Game of Thrones, I don't know how many people have seen the Game of Thrones, but it was the most pirated TV show of 2013. It was from HBO, I believe. And you know, HBO is not easy to get, or if even possible to get in some places. It's also very expensive. And if you're buying it just for one particular show, people are probably just going to go to BitTorrent and you know and look at it if you don't have HBO connected to you. So it's this idea that people today, if they want something badly enough, you might break the law a little bit, fudge around a little bit to get something you want. People tend to do this sort of thing. Teachers do it. I mean, teachers do it in classrooms all the time, I would say. You know, even back years ago when I was in the classroom, I'd record things like, you know, science shows like Nova or something, where I'd bring it into classrooms. And I probably wasn't supposed to do this. I'm assuming some of you even like record Hockey Night in Canada, where it tells you specifically, very carefully, not to record Hockey Night in Canada. No rebroadcasting, etc. Kind of the harshest of all the copyright rulings. We have to remember, I think, what's really important is this is about balance too. That not all sharing is illegal or unethical. It's really a balance here in many cases. So, for instance, I don't know how many of your students know about the Creative Commons, and this is one of the most important things to think about. And thanks, Russell. As you know how important this is. The Creative Commons is not only a place where you can actually get stuff, you know, from the internet, but you can also license your stuff in Creative Commons licenses. And I think this is really an important thing, that we actually don't have to make everything totally copyright, that we can actually use copyleft that allows other people to use their stuff. And this kind of moves toward, again, this idea of balance. Sometimes if we give away stuff, we actually get more value for it in some ways. One of the most underutilized sites in the world, I would say, is the archive.org. This is a site, an organization that is trying to basically archive the entire internet. And I think they're up to something like 400 trillion pages or something. Like, it's ridiculous. And Shelby's mentioning like the Wayback Machine is really cool, where you can actually go to say, I want to see what Yahoo looked in 1996. Really kind of an amazing thing. And really, if you think about it, like how important this is. If you think, you know, if we look back at our historical record, we can go back to stone slates and, you know, wall drawings or cave drawings and that sort of thing. But if you think about it, if we think about all the stuff that's been created since the 1990s, I can think of my own, you know, development. I've created tons of web pages, but most of those web pages just end up getting deleted, or I take them down or something, and so there's no historical record. And in some ways, it's kind of nice that some organization is actually trying to archive the web so that we have some sort of cultural, you know, some cultural representation of our knowledge. If you think about it, like basically, you know, 1995, 1994 is when we saw a mosaic in the internet and we started creating web pages. If there was an alien society that came to us, if we didn't have some sort of, you know, some tangible drawings or some way of actually sharing our knowledge, it's going to look like we were just sort of a lost generation after the 1990s. So it's really important that we preserve what we're creating in digital forms. It's also important, in Canada we have something called fair dealing. In the US it's called fair use. Similar ideas, not exactly the same, but in Canada, since it's specifically you know, targeting especially Saskatchewan teachers here, it's important. If you look down to 3.2, these are questions you ask about how you use things in the classroom or with copyright. So for instance, this idea, if you are using a dealing, if you were using a particular artifact, you're supposed to ask questions like, what is the purpose? What is the character? What is the amount of the dealing? What are the alternatives to the dealing? What is the nature of the work? And this big question, 3.2.6, is what is the effect of the dealing on the work? So if you decided to, you know, use Gangnam Style and do a remix or do a lip dub or something else, there's actually a lot that you can actually do within the educational context versus, say, a business context. So as an educator, you're actually allowed to do a lot more in the context of study, in the context of you know, studying an artifact. in the context of an educational, teaching and that sort of thing versus, making money off something like this. And so, by the way, fair dealing is a common term in most Commonwealth countries, whereas fair use is more of an American term, but it's important to understand the differences and the exemptions built into these copyright laws. I'm going to take a little bit of break for a second. I'm going to show you kind of one of my favorite recent remixes. So what I'll do is bring in this little Brian Williams rap, and so I'll paste it in there. And if you can watch this video, it's just a couple minutes, and when you're done, come back to it, please. Come back to here. All right, so so some of you are back here. Oh yeah. Yeah, and so some of you may have seen there's other examples of this. There's an Obama one where he actually sings "Call Me Maybe," which is a great one, and it's really funny. And remixes have really come about. I mean, they're becoming part of our cultural fabric, I guess, in many ways. So this was on the one on Jimmy Fallon. You see the odd one there. There's a lot of really, really good ones out there. And I think it's important to understand, and the complexity of these things, as Ketsia is saying, this would take a lot of work to do something like this. And, yeah, exactly. Like, I want to do a lot of this with my students. Now, for instance, like the Obama one, if you think about, the complexity and how many videos they'd have to watch of Obama's speeches and trying to find it and changing the inflection and the cuts having to be perfect. I mean, these are really really cool, media literacy devices that you would have to employ to create something like this. And so it's really quite cool. Remix has come a long way. It's become something that's much more, I guess, normed, in terms of how we actually use it and how we actually, participate with media. Now, a couple of really great videos that you may want to watch with students, and we'll talk more about resources certainly in the fourth week. This is a great one called RIP, a Remix Manifesto, and it is in the Google Doc. And again, if you missed the Google Doc, here it is. So this is called RIP, a Remix Manifesto. It's a longer documentary. I quite like it. It does drag in a couple of places, so I'd maybe watch it first. What I love about this particular video is it talks about remix, and it follows a sort of a remix artist by the name of Girl Talk, who talks about what he does and how he makes a living and so on, and how he basically does the remixes as well. But it also kind of moves towards great to see some people from eComp alumni. This is awesome. But it also moves towards the idea. What I love at the end is it goes towards the idea of, okay, how does copyright apply to like intellectual property in such as like the human genome, or pharmaceutical medication like anti-HIV, antiretrovirus, vaccines and medication. So it's really important that copyright's not just about music, it's all about all of the things that we create. Intellectual property is about all human knowledge, not just music. And I think that really makes a great point. So it's worthwhile watching something like that for sure. If you want a little bit for shorter bits that talk about like where all good ideas come from, you can look at, this is from Kirby Ferguson, who does this shorter series. I think there's about 4 videos, and they're fairly short, but they're really good. And basically it talks about how everything is a remix, and it goes through music and specifically, but then he goes through other topics, and he talks about how all of our ideas actually start with different ones. And it's really an important piece, I think. This is really, really important information to go through. I'm going to get you to watch just a really short video here. Now, this didn't work for everyone last night for whatever reason, but this is actually the end of a TED Talk from a guy by the name of Larry Lessig. And he's one of my heroes, really, when it comes to this. He was in RIP, a Remix Manifesto. And what I've used here is Tube Chop to just cut the very, very end of this video. And hopefully this works for you. It's not blocked or anything like that, and hopefully it works. But basically, this is the end of the TED Talk, and he talks about specifically what technology has done, like the way that we make kids pirates, what it actually does to their intellectual development, their social development, and what it's doing to us. Oh, we lost audio. Did everyone else? How about now? You have audio again? Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Thanks for letting me know. You okay? Back? Audio, audio? All right, okay. Huh, okay. We have little glitches here every once in a while, but it's okay. Yes, software patents also choke creativity. Absolutely. Good. Okay, you're back. So again, yes, I'm chipmunky now. So this will hopefully be okay after I show this video. So if you can click on this video, watch it, and basically it's the idea of, you know, what copyright actually does to the social and intellectual development of kids. A really important topic, I think, and something that we don't actually think about. So here you go. If you can watch the video, let me know when you're back. Oh, sorry to hear that it's blocked. YouTube is probably not blocked. This is actually a really nice tool because you can block out just a little piece of the video. Anyone else back? Let me know when you're back. Yeah, okay, so sorry for those who it was blocked from, which is also a lesson in itself in digital citizenship. You know, teachers are being blocked from tools such as TubeChop, which all it does is basically chops up pieces. It's a great teaching tool, so that's sad sometimes. So again, another reason we shouldn't have filters. You know, what I really like about this is, you know, if we're doing this, if everyone knows, I guess it's same in other forms of legislation. If everyone knows people are breaking the law, what does it actually do to the moral and ethical character of our kids? You know, if everyone's basically saying, hey, you know, like, yeah, we know that downloading is illegal, but we're going to do it anyway, and people are doing it. I'm not saying that the law should always change because of what people do, but it's at the point where it becomes ridiculous. So, for instance, if you think about Jamie Rosette Thomas, who is a girl somewhere in, actually a young mother, I think a single mother of 2 or 3 kids. She was fined over $2.1 million originally for her downloading of, like, you know, half a dozen songs or a dozen songs. And so the copyright law just gets absolutely ridiculous in terms of how it's punitive, and it's not really doing anything. And as Carola says, it's very similar to the American prohibition against alcohol. People do it, and it really creates a corrosive society. So what does that mean when it comes to digital citizenship? So I think I love that little piece because it really gets me thinking a different approach of what it actually does to us. What does prohibition, in that sense, do to us? And he even uses the idea of the age of prohibition. So, you know, a question to think about here is, how do we model modern approaches to copyright and creativity where the rights of both creators and consumers are balanced and respected? And this is really one of the biggest questions of our time. We live in a knowledge economy. We live in an information society. So what does that actually mean? How do we actually balance this? Because people still got to live. I mean, we have novelists and authors and people who write and create, you know, artists who create, you know, work. They're sometimes paid adequately and sometimes they're not paid. So how do we change this in a way that we balance those rights and we respect people who are actually, you know, very creative and who basically make their work that way? I think it's really important to understand, and, you know, to break sort of the, I guess, the dependency on some of the issues like recording companies and the RIAA and the MPAA, for instance. So it's really a complex time. All right, so the third topic here is this idea of identity. And identity is, you know, really a big thing. It's probably the one that is probably the most important to me in terms of, you know, what it actually means when we think about citizenship. I almost always first think of digital identity. If you think about identity and how it's formed and how it's been formed in our lives, if we think about it, how many people, I assume, could go back home somewhere if you have, you know, parents with you still, or somewhere in your house you have like a binder full of photographs that are, you know, that you kept, that in some ways has your childhood. Like, if you can look at them, you know, those ones that you basically pull the plastic wrap back and, you know, and then you basically stick your photos in and they stick to that sticky stuff. I'm not even sure what they're called, the old photo albums. I have tons of these things at home, and this is where my identity lies. It's in the living room of my parents' house in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. If something burnt, if we burnt down the house, probably all that stuff would disappear. Kind of sad in some ways. In the past, the way in which we mediated our identities was selective, closed, and controlled. We were very, very careful about what was showed, what was out there. We didn't have much choice really when it came down to publicizing things. I'm not going to show this video, but it's something that you could probably take a look at. This is actually a great little video from Google. It's an advertisement that basically it's a dad who, as soon as his daughter was born, he got a Gmail account and started basically sending her emails as she grew up. Some of you have seen it before, but it's really worthwhile looking at because basically the idea is that we form digital identities for our students and our children at a very, very young age. And this obviously has some major effects. I don't think we even know what sort of effect this actually has on our kids yet. Stats-wise, if you look at, this is a few years back, I think 2009 study, it said the average digital birth of children happens at about 6 months. Something like 37% of kids have some sort of digital identity formation before they're even born. I think it's important to know that. In these 6 countries, about 81% of children under the age of 2 have some sort of digital footprint. There's very few there that don't have something out there of them at some point, and I think it's important to understand, and kids, of course, because we're growing up in a digital society and our main form of, commerce and education is through digital means. Yeah, Facebook for kids, if we're thinking about the average age, we're talking about an average age of social media maturity. This goes to Cassia here. The average age of social media maturity where a kid goes from Club Penguin to Facebook is about 11 years of age, but we know many that have, obviously if that's the average, there are many other kids that have, social media accounts or adult social media accounts well before they're 11. By law, with the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, they're supposed to be 13. And so Susan's saying, I choose not to post my kids so they can choose whatever their footprint will be. That's one approach, which is a totally valid approach. Some people post more photographs. I'm one that does post photographs. But now that my children are getting a bit older, they get to discern, especially my 9-year-old gets to talk about what she thinks might be a good one. We have that conversation. So it's really important to understand, what's out there. Some schools are more permissive than others, but it's a conversation we have to have, certainly. Kids need to know, and I work with young kids, and we talk about the inherent characteristics of digital media. And we talk about the idea that if you post a photo online, that it can be easily copied, instantly shared, easily edited, and potentially viewable by millions, although it's difficult to get 1 million viewers to see it. Unless it's kind of stupid or really, really creative. Sometimes that works, but that's still in a rare occasion. Also, we came from a culture that was private by default and public with effort, and we've moved much more to where we've actually seen public by default and private with effort. And if you think a good example of this would be kids having to untag themselves from places like Facebook. I think that's a really, a telling sign that things are really much more public by default than they used to be in many cases. So yeah, I think it's really kind of an interesting time. Now, there's some discussion here. Maybe the 13 needs to be revisited. So many students lying down, and that's the other thing. I think that fits well with Leslie's video. That kids are lying all the time to basically get into some of these sites that they want to use. Should it be revisited? I don't know. I mean, there seems to be some debate even in the chat room. It's a really hard question to fully understand. Like, should we raise it? Should we lower it? Should we not have kids on the internet, online? Is it even possible? Lots of really, really interesting questions around that. Now, so obviously it goes bad sometimes. This was a kid known by the Star Wars kid, and I've actually linked to his Wikipedia article if you want to take a look at this, if you understand what this was. But basically, in 2003, there was a boy who posted some videos. He didn't post them, sorry. He took some video in a VHS camera at his school, and some other kids in the school found it, and they did some remixes. And basically this thing got seen by hundreds of millions of people, and it was really a big case of bullying. On the Wikipedia page, it talks about how there was a lawsuit that this kid, well, 4 of his schoolmates were sued for about $250,000, the kids that remixed the video. And the lawsuit stated in part that he had to endure and still endures today harassment and derision from his high school mates and from the public at large. And I think it's really important to understand like the impact that photos can have on kids. Sometimes it's very negative, sometimes it's very positive, but it certainly takes away their choice around their own digital identity. Like once it's online, it's part of their identity forever and ever. If we think about other bad cases of this, there's a Saskatchewan Wanderer position. That's with the government of Saskatchewan. A few years ago, there was, I think it's a great position. It's kind of a cool job. Basically, what you get to do is sort of tweet and Facebook and be the social media voice for Tourism Saskatchewan. I believe that's the department. And it's a really cool job. And when they initially had this, you had to compete through it to get the job through tweeting and Facebooking and doing all that sort of stuff to get your reputation out there. And there was one kid that was trying to get the job, and what happened was when he was 19 years old, he tried to get this job, and he was doing really well, and by his own words, he was sort of kind of in the lead, I guess. And so he was doing well. He was from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and what happened at some point was there was a video that was unearthed of him when he was 17 years old. He was at a Saskatchewan Roughriders football game, and he was swearing. And this video came out, and it really damaged his reputation in this particular competition, and he was officially disqualified of the swearing. And this is a term that's often known as context collapse. So basically, you do something in one context that it gets seen in another context, and those contexts collapse together. And it's something that more and more kids are facing when we're starting to look at the use of social media in job searches and job applications, and it being part of your digital identity. Really, really an important thing. And it's not just kids. I mean, teachers make mistakes. This is a teacher who decided to post on her wall, she put comments on her Facebook that she described her students as germ bags and her parents as being snobby and arrogant. And she didn't really think that any of her 50 friends would sort of rat on her, I guess. But friends of a friend can see it, and privacy settings, et cetera, and she ended up losing her job. And so you see more and more people making bad mistakes or posting things online. And these are people that should know better, right? These are people who shouldn't say these sorts of things, and people are treating social media, I guess, in some ways as a private club or as something that you would say in a staff room or something that that you shouldn't say in the first place. But they're maybe people who are saying these things in other contexts don't understand digital media. So it's really, really important. I mean, I'd just say don't say mean things in general, but it happens. And I guess we're living in a surveillance society, and I mean this is not just sort of some dystopian dream. We live in a surveillance society. Cameras are absolutely everywhere. I mean, if you think about your classroom, there's a camera in just about every kid's hand. So cameras are everywhere. We have recording devices everywhere. You go to the mall, you go anywhere. There's, it is the Truman Show in many cases. And Big Brother, it's not even Big Brother as being the government. It's Big Brother as being everyone. And I think that's a really big distinction that we've reached this place where everyone and records each other. And this couldn't be any truer than a few years ago. Well, I thought it was kind of interesting. There was the Vancouver riots, and you remember them. There was a lot of damage done to the city of Vancouver, and a lot of people were really, really upset at this. And yeah, actually, Ted will talk about Google last near the end of the presentation. That's a good one to bring up. What would happen was there's tons of damage to the city, and a lot of people were very, very upset. And but what we ended up with were like thousands and thousands of photographs of people breaking the law. So someone decided to set up a blog, and they set up a blog called Public Shaming Eternus. There's a link to it on the Google Doc if you'd like to see that. And basically what people tried to do was crowdsource, who are these people? Who are these people breaking the law? So one good example was they found this kid here. He was from Vancouver. He decided to start a police car on fire. I think his name was Nathan Kodalak. He ended up being caught here red-handed. Someone identified him, and we found out later he was like a water polo player headed to the Olympics. He had lots of scholarships, and otherwise was seemingly a really, really good kid. And then just in that moment, of course, he's identified and, doing something where he thought, that he wouldn't be seen, and this ends up. So I'm not saying that this is something that he should have been doing if there was no cameras that existed, but it's really kind of an interesting phenomena that really, in every aspect, whether it's real or virtual, if we want to use that dualism, we're always being, held accountable somewhere else. You still with me? I just want to make sure the audio is okay, that you can hear me, that I'm not talking to a paper bag. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, the world is watching, and I guess this is where we start to see some positive approaches. This is where a lot of stuff is happening in classrooms. Seth Godin said something like, everything you now do ends up in your permanent record. The best plan is to overload Google with a long tail of good stuff and to always act as if you're on candid camera, because you are. And I like this idea because we are scared to post stuff online, but if we're going to do that, let's make sure that it's our most positive stuff. It's our best stuff. Dean Sharesky uses the term, where can I find your best stuff online? And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Like, people can create our portfolios or our identities for us in some ways. So it's important to understand, what is the power of our own voice online. So yeah, Seth Godin has, really kind of an interesting look on this. Just to give you an example, like I had a student last semester, and some of you actually who've taken eComp know this very well. You've created portfolios in my class. Here's an example of, Mark Renier, who I just like the visual look of this, and it's really great. I mean, I'm not going to tell you about the content and so on, but this is, when I go to markrenier.ca, this is his blog, this is his space on the web. And I think it's just great that, he's got his own domain. And I think more and more that's really kind of an important thing. That when I Google this particular student, this is what you find. This is the first thing that I find in Google, and it's that space that's controlled by him that he's decided to own. And I think that's great. Now, tomorrow, same time that this session started, you can hear about how Kathy Cassidy is dealing with this, how she actually has students at 6 years of age blogging and looking at, I guess, in a sense, a portfolio, so she can talk more about digital citizenship in the elementary classroom. It's not so far out that we can't do this sort of thing, but I would really, Kathy is just an excellent teacher, and she's got some really great ideas around this, and she does this with a lot of caution, and I think that's really important too. So really interested. You can catch her tomorrow. My brother, George Kuros, he does this as well in terms of, he's got his own ePortfolio project that he does with students. It goes from grade 1 on. We also, if you look at the university sector, this is kind of an interesting project. This is at the University of Mary Washington, where they basically have a project where they become the ISP for their students. They actually purchase domain names for their students, and they host them for the rest of their lives. So the university itself becomes the domain name registration student or service. And so I just love that idea that you can actually say, you know what, we're investing in our students, that we're going to invest in their digital identity, that we want to host your identities, as long as you want them out there. And so they put a lot of work into things like portfolios, which I think is just an awesome idea. So I guess this question here, getting near the end here, but how do we help students develop positive digital identities? What assignments, activities, assignments, projects can we integrate into our teaching to help our learners build their digital footprints? And one of the questions tomorrow for the Twitter chat, and we'd like you to, certainly join us at 7 o'clock tomorrow with the Twitter chat, is, we have to think about this in terms of privacy as well. Like, what is the balance between privacy and this idea that we need to be connected? And I think that's really an important piece too. Where do we draw the line? Where do we do this where students are, producing their digital footprints all the time, but how do we make sure that we maintain as educators some level of privacy for our students as well? And I think that's important too. All right, the topic of netiquette is one that's really a big one. The last two, I'm going to try to keep them fairly short so we can kind of finish off and have a few minutes at least. Netiquette is basically this idea of etiquette on the web. As you know, the web is can be a scary place in many cases. This quote from Lev Grossman, some of the comments on YouTube make you weep for the future of humanity, just for the spelling alone, never mind the obscenity and the naked hatred. I just really love this quote. That, it does kind of point to the fact that places like YouTube and Twitter can be places that are the perfect place, in many cases. There's some negative stuff there. But there's a lot of really great places out there too. So this is a really good example of how to take something that's really, really negative and make it into a really, really positive thing. So this was, how many people saw this Karen Klein when she was bullied on the bus? It was a bus, she was a bus monitor, and it was posted to YouTube. Yeah, and it was just a horrible situation. And so she was bullied by these kids. They posted it to YouTube. They're calling her like fats and all sorts of horrible things. And yeah, so it's really really quite something to see that sort of thing. And then what was cool about it is someone decided to set up a Indiegogo account, and that's where you can crowdsource money for particular causes. And in this case, they basically wanted to give Karen a vacation, so they tried to get $5,000 through the internet. And instead of getting 5,000, people kept on donating and donating and donating, and they ended up raising over $700,000. And what was cool about it is she actually came back and she created something called the Anti-Bullying Foundation for Adults. So this was a really negative story that ended up having a really cool positive turn, and then it even got more positive in a sense that she decided to give back and allow other people to benefit from the charity that was given to her. So this is one of those things that you can really change things quickly. Another sort of everyday thing, because sometimes we think that our kids can't do anything like that big, that we can't get $700,000 raised or do those really, really large things. This is just a moment on the internet where I saw this. A guy, he decided to post a photo of his mother who he just lost to cancer, and he posted on a website called Reddit. And so basically what he asked for in this post is, because it was the last photograph of him and his mother, and she happened to have these oxygen tubing around her nose, he just wanted a better photograph of this. So he asked anyone out there with some good photoshopping skills who can help me out and fix this photograph of me. So if you look at that picture, really great photograph, beautiful photograph, but he just wanted it kind of fixed up a bit. And so people helped, and this was one person, and his quote was, my best attempt, I only removed the tubing, left colors and levels alone. I'm sorry for your loss. Another person helped, said I color corrected the skin tones as well. Someone else helped, minor lighting, 6x4 crop for printing and standard size, and remove some of the background. Well done, fellow Redditors. Another person helped. This person said he fixed the chair. If you look at the, this is my favorite part of this whole thing. If you look at the chair a couple slides back, you'll notice there's a big red chunk out of it. And so this guy saw that little chunk, and he wanted to make this photograph even more perfect, and he decided to fix the chair and get rid of the little red chunk out of the vinyl there. Really kind of a fun thing. Last quote was basically, sorry for the late help. I went for simplicity, enjoy, and I hope you remember her well. And this is just one of those moments, like on the web, where we can actually do really well for one another. And I think the web needs to be more like this. And this is what I see as an etiquette. It's not simply like being your best. It's really kind of changing the world for others. And I think this is a really an important thing too. So really kind of cool. The question here, how do we help our students become kind and caring citizens who act with integrity in all spaces, including digital ones? So if we are going to think that digital spaces are, something different, we have to think about, how do we create this act of integrity? How do we get students to, even when they're anonymous, to do some really amazing things? And I think that's a really big question for our time. So, all right, last topic, student activism. And this is still on the same lines as what I just discussed here and the Karen Klein Foundation and a lot of these different pieces here. We often think about, we kind of discredit this generation with, their inability to act in real ways. We look at things like Facebook causes, and you can put up a cause there and you can get a bunch of likes, and it doesn't really feel like it doesn't really feel like it's doing anything. In many cases, it doesn't do anything. I would even argue that sometimes if we just do all of our activism in places like this, we're doing less than nothing. We're being ineffectual, and we're spending time in the wrong places. I saw this poster a while back thinking, you know, actions speak louder than like buttons. And I really like this idea that we have to really think about what we do, and I think that's important. I'm not saying that every social media campaign doesn't work. In fact, a lot of them do really, really well. But we have to also think of what are actions actually accomplishing, I guess. Where are we spending our time, and where can we spend our time the best, make the best use of our time in both face-to-face and online situations. So there are great sites out there, places like Indiegogo, as you saw before as well. As Carol is saying, one of my teachers had her students do a photo store on anti-bullying, you know, stuff like that. Like, those are really great classroom activities. Okay, Sharon, thanks for coming. We're just about finishing up anyway, so great. We're done in 10 minutes for sure. Kiva, which is another interesting one, I think is really a great one. I know a lot of teachers are starting to use this. As Shelley says, Kiva is great. This is a great way to do micro-lending and to start thinking about issues across the world from us, and to think how fortunate and privileged we possibly can be sometimes. And it's great for kids to think about the metrics and the mathematics and the social justice pieces around this as well. Other things that creep up, there was really some bad media around this thing called Nick Nominates, where it was kind of a bad trend on the internet where basically people created these YouTube videos and they drank online and they dared other people to drink, and it was basically binge drinking and sort of a lot of other gross stuff that people did online. But there's a lot of Canadians and of course people around the world who decided to turn this into a much more positive thing. So like my students in ecomp, for instance, did these things called teach nominations. So I was very proud of them to do that sort of thing where they actually start teaching people, and it was cool to see that sort of thing happening. But of course, even that pay it forward piece was really, really cool. So more and more people, I think, are doing things like this. But I think ultimately it's not about, you know, getting kids to do this. I think it's ultimately getting kids to the point where they feel that they want to do this, that, you know, building that instinct within our children to basically do good things, to take something bad and make it really, really good. And I think that that's the hardest thing. Other things recently, like the no makeup selfie, I thought that was an interesting thing. You know, it seemed like nothing, but it actually raised over $6 million. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. This is a really good story. I have the video in the Google Doc. And the Google Doc basically talks, it's a video that has these students, and they were from Iowa. They saw a lot of bullying happening at their school, and they decided to basically create a Twitter account that gave people sincere compliments. And so it really targeted people all over the school, didn't look at the popular kids or the kids that were less popular. It basically tried to bring up everyone in the school and make them feel better, and I think that was a really great thing. So I guess the questions for this area, and again, these are just, fall into the ones that you really are interested in. Digital leadership, exactly, Julie. What is the role of schools in terms of developing student activism, or you can even say student activists? How might we encourage and support students to use online spaces and social media to contribute positively to our world? I guess, we have so many tools at our disposal now. How do we discern which ones to use? How do we know how to use them? How do we look for the right causes? How do we get students to find the right causes and to do different things that they're passionate about? All right, so just a conclusion, and then if we want to take some questions, that would be awesome. You can stay around for a while yet. I love this. This is actually a post. It's in the Google Doc. It's by Dan Heisler. And he uses the parallel, especially for schools who aren't doing much on this topic. He says, imagine for a second if we taught our teenagers to drive in cars in the same manner we attempt to teach them about social media. He says driving lessons would never take place in an actual car. Driving lessons would only focus on what not to do. And driving lessons would be taught by adults, teachers, or parents with little or no driving experience. So this is really this idea that I think we have to move towards the idea where we're, as many of you said in the chat, where we're really modeling this for our students, where we, know things like, things like Snapchat. Like, don't be afraid of Snapchat. Try it. Load it up with a friend. See, what it is exactly. Get a sense of what this is. And if you see some merit or value in it, things like Twitter or Vine or Instagram, there's a lot of really educational, great educational uses of this. So how do we show students that they're not used to just waste time or to send inappropriate stuff, but there's a lot of really great uses for these particular tools. So how do we find out what the kids are doing, try to emulate some of the things that they're doing well, to celebrate some of their successes in these spaces, and really have a better conversation and build relationships with this. And I think it's increasingly important if we think of some of the great changes that are happening right now. Some of you mentioned Google Glass at the beginning. Google Glass has made a recent partnership with a company called Luxottica, who makes 80% of the eyewear on the market. And so what you're seeing now is a push to have things like Google Glass. If you don't know what Google Glass is, you should certainly look it up. Like Google Glass that becomes much more mainstream. And that's causing some major ripples in our society. So for instance, like, people want privacy. There's no doubt about it that we want privacy. So for instance, just recently there was a girl that went into a San Francisco bar, and she brought in her Google glasses, and people basically just about got into a physical fight with her. I think it was pretty close to a fight, or maybe it was a fight. But it was something where there's this real tension between people who want to be digital all the time and people who want to have their privacy, etc. And I think that's really important, and we're going to see more and more of this as technology continues to become ubiquitous. So when we start to see technology much more ubiquitous in society, we have to think that digital citizenship is not just digital citizenship, it's just citizenship. This is something that's much deeper, it's much more ingrained in our everyday lives, it's ubiquitous, it's transparent, it's like oxygen, really, in every sense. Digital identity, in many cases, is not just identity, the digital world has huge repercussions and influence on our identity. So we have to understand it's not digital identity anymore, it's just our identity. Our digital identity defines us, who we are in everyday spaces, and I think that's really, really important, more important than ever. And I love this quote, and I think this kind of is, in many ways, the way I see digital citizenship. It kind of gets it away from the beginning, and this sort of brings it full circle here, that it's not just about recognizing and dealing with online hazards like we talked about at the beginning of this session. It's about building safe spaces and communities, understanding how to manage personal information, and about being internet savvy. Using your online presence to grow and shape your world in a safe, creative way, inspiring others to do the same. And I think that's huge in many ways. So, this sort of idea is really, digital citizenship ultimately is a much more positive approach to keeping kids safe. It's not just keeping kids safe, it's developing the best children that we could possibly develop in an age that has a lot of different challenges. And I think that's really, really important. So anyway, so are there any questions or thoughts or anything that you want to bring, or do you need some guidance in terms of what we're doing in this MOOC or how you can participate in a better way? I'd love to hear more from you. Anything that you want to talk, and feel free if you'd like to. If you need to go now, that's great, because we've budgeted till 5:15, and that's what we're doing for these sessions, and that's totally great. I won't feel I won't feel sad that you've gone, or I'm not sad. That's the wrong term. I won't feel like insulted. But if there's anything you'd like to say, feel free to take the audio as well. You can certainly speak. I'd love to hear your voice. So feel free. Don't be shy. Yeah, Ted, that's a good point. I mean, I don't necessarily, I think digital citizenship is, digital literacy, it's hard to say exactly where they're positioned. I mean, there's a number of ways that you could put them. Oh yeah, I'll post this on the Google Doc with these slides. Digital literacy certainly could be seen as the bigger thing. I think digital citizenship is much more specific in terms of not what we know and how we discern knowledge, but it's actually, I guess it's an attitude about the world, and certainly literacy can be seen as that same thing. I'm not sure if they're necessarily one above the other. I think they probably work more in concert with one another and have more in common. I don't think you can be a digital citizen without being digitally literate in that case, if that makes any sense. So I guess that's how I put them in. I think it's a big component of either. Doesn't matter which way you look at it, but I think that's certainly something that's important. Oh, no problem, Ramona. Thank you for coming. Curious about other provinces or regions who have addressed this instruction in the prescribed curriculum. I've seen pieces. I know maybe Joanna can talk about that. Joanna Sanders here in the room is actually the digital, I'm not sure if the actual term is the digital fluency consultant in the province of Saskatchewan. And I know she's done a lot of work in looking at what they've done in other provinces. And I think she might be the best bet in terms of getting a sense of, where people are doing that. And I'm sure she'd take your questions, John, more specifically. I think Manitoba has done some interesting things recently, and they're having to do things because we're starting to see full-scale implementations of, districts doing one-to-one. What was the district? St. James district, I think, in St. James, something else, Assiniboia district in Manitoba, who's basically rolling out like $1 million of iPads. So there's a lot of interesting things that the other school districts are doing. I'm not sure if Joanna can speak to those. Is she in the room still? Yes. But she may be able to, give you a sense of what else is happening in other places. Yeah, thanks, Ted. Yeah, I agree with that. And so, it's hard to say. I mean, that's a good conversation to figure out where does it fit, but I think they're certainly integral to each other. I'm trying to read some of these things. So what is the responsibility for informing parents? It's been interesting here, Rachel. I've done a lot of sessions for parents at schools, and in many cases, I think some parents are really, really interested in this sort of thing. And then sometimes we create parent nights, and often, and I don't know what it is. Like sometimes parents won't come to things that are much more positive. Like I think there's a good show up sometimes at things where the RCMP or police coming on, but to be critical of that, I think sometimes when we see a police perspective on some of these issues, they take these fear tactics. And, sometimes, parents, and this is, I'm a parent, so I guess I can speak to this as well. Sometimes I think it's difficult to take a different stance. You're either very pro one or the other, and I think it's difficult. And I think it's a difficult conversation with parents and teachers in general in terms of kind of getting a sense, because we often, whether you're a parent, teacher, educator, admin, whatever else, we often take the same tendency towards technology that we view in ourselves. So for instance, if I'm, for myself, I'm much more liberal with technology. I use a lot of technology, and I'm okay thinking that my students and my kids will use a lot of technology as long as it's balanced and critical. So it's difficult. I think there's a huge responsibility in understanding this, and in fact, I'm worried that at some point, if our school districts do not deal with digital citizenship in schools, that there's going to be, we're talking, negligence suits, because, kids get into trouble online, they're not employable, they run into other issues, and we never taught them that. We never taught them to develop a positive digital identity. We're talking major issues down the road. This is much more, this is as important as educating the child in mathematics or English or science or anything else. This is an important thing because this basically ties everything together. This is the livelihood of our children. This is the reputation and identity of our children that we're talking about. And of course, the safety pieces as well. So I think that's really important too. Yeah, and I think that's it, Allison. We offer the sessions, but often, I'll go to, I'll drive to Swift Current and I get 3 people. And it's like, and I don't know if it's, and that's just one example. Sometimes you get there and you come a long way and you're not getting many people. So it's hard, like how do we create the conversation where students and parents really want to be part of that, where we're not just trying to scare them, we're trying to really build their futures together. And I think parents are such a huge part of this. So some people are talking, I hope I'm not missing anything. Yeah, that's sort of thing, Allison. I think, the police sessions, and I have great respect for law and authority, but they take a very specific view to this, and some of it's, absolutely, I'm not saying it's true or misleading, but it's a very different approach, and I think we can also deal with this in much more positive approaches rather than preventative approaches. Preventative approaches aren't realistic in my mind because kids are going to use these technologies. They're going to use them in ways we don't understand, so we need to have a better conversation. That's not going to be totally about preventative. I guess it's almost like an abstinence-only conversation in some states. In some ways, it's different. Like we know that kids aren't going to be abstinent from the internet in that sense. So I think we have to think about that. John says we have found success by engaging students in the parent learning piece, and I think if you can do that, John, and you can share how you're doing that, I think that's important. And Russell, sorry, that's the Ruster. Police is to embed it across all curriculum and teach digital citizenship in context. Absolutely. Model, and remote responsibility. Good, good. Okay. Any other questions before we go here? Of course, wherever you post and you have these questions in Google Plus or Twitter, we're going to try our best to get back to you. We want to make this, we don't have all the answers. But we're hoping that with all the people that are participating, we have admins, we have teachers, we have policymakers, we have people from around the world, not just Saskatchewan. Hopefully we'll get a little closer to understanding this as a collective, and I think, as individuals for sure. Yeah, so, BC, we're in the process of curricular transformation. There's a lot of really interesting things happening in BC. Even Alberta, we're doing some interesting things with, pieces around this. Yeah, well, I mean, the MOOC can be overwhelming too. I think, it depends on how you take it. But even doing a session like this, for instance, any parents, in Saskatchewan or around the world could have participated in this. And this is something that you could say, hey, you can do this at home, or we'll open the gym and we'll throw up this on the wall. I noticed at least there was one case. There was a St. Mary staff has. I'm assuming that there's actually more than one person at St. Mary who's watching this. So you can bring in staff together. You can have conversations together. So there's all sorts of ways of doing this. And of course, this is a free resource. Sometimes it's interesting that sometimes people are afraid of free sometimes. That they don't see free as being a good thing. If you make people pay $5, they're like, oh, I'll go for it. It's interesting. There's a real something free can't be good, or something free can't get us going. But this is great that we're able to do this and provide this for free to anyone. All right. Okay. I'm going to hit the end recording. Well, thanks, Flo. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you. And everyone else who's come tonight, we're going to talk more about next week. The next week core topic is really going to get to looking at, so how do we actually develop positive digital identities for our kids? What are some activities and things that we can do in classes and classrooms to do this, together and start really taking on some of these processes? And again, really much in a positive framework. Anyway, so thanks for being part of this. We really appreciate it. The recording will be put up there. If you want, you can go to File, Save, Chat, and you can actually keep the entire chat if you want to do something with that as well, remix it or whatever else. There it is for you. And so thanks, and we'll see you next week. If you want to do the blogging session tonight it starts in an hour and a half. Sue Waters will be here to talk about blogging, and of course, don't miss Kathy Cassidy's session at 3:45 tomorrow, and that's it for the week, I think. Yeah. Oh, and the Twitter chat tomorrow night. So, thanks. Take care, everyone. Have a great night.